I didn't run to find love. I ran to escape being a pawn in a game of alliances. But that frozen night, lost between blackwood trees and howling wind, I stumbled into the impossible. The most powerful alpha in the territories, wounded, hiding, and dangerously mine. There's a place where fear and desire blur, where instinct speaks louder than reason, and even kings bleed. If I had turned back, none of this would have happened. But I stayed. And there, in that war-forgotten cabin, fate found me, with storm-gray eyes and a voice that shook me to my core. How did the Alpha King end up alone in the forest, bleeding and hunted? And why does the bond that sparked between us have the power to ignite war across the packs? Before you understand, we need to go back to the exact moment I ran from the ceremony meant to seal my future, never knowing it was already waiting for me in the snow. The metallic tang of fear mixed with the sharp scent of pine needles and snow. Every agonizing step forward was a choice, a desperate rejection of the life laid out for me in the opulent, but ultimately stifling confines of the Ironwood Citadel. I was supposed to be preparing for my mating ceremony, a ceremony scheduled for my political imprisonment, a calculated maneuver to solidify the Haze Pack's waning influence. Instead, I was deep within the unforgiving embrace of the frostbite taiga, my breath clouding the frigid air like ghostly prayers. My name is Autumn Sinclair, and at 22 years old, I was already tired of being a pawn. I remembered the weight of the heirloom mating band, a heavy, cold thing meant to signify alliance, not love, sitting on the velvet cushion just hours ago. The sight of it had fueled the final, terrifying surge of adrenaline that propelled me over the citadel walls. Now, the only thing I held was a flimsy sense of freedom and the chilling realization that my pack was hunting me. I shed my last link to my former life moments before, the satchel of identity. It contained the minimal documentation confirming my rank and birthright. I flung it into a ravine, watching the leather disappear beneath a fresh drift of powder. Let them find that empty satchel and believe I was lost to the wilderness. I needed to be nobody, nothing, just a ghost dissolving into the snow. My legs were shaking, burning with exertion. The cold had ceased to be a sensation, and had become a dull, deep ache in my bones. I had been running for what felt like 2 days, fueled only by stale water and sheer terror. The forest was dense, the trees thick and menacing, but I kept pushing, seeking a silence so profound it would drown out the memory of the guards' angry shouts. Then I saw it, tucked into a cluster of ancient, twisted blackwood trees, barely visible beneath a heavy mantle of snow and ivy, was a structure that looked less like a shelter and more like a graveyard monument. It was dilapidated, leaning precariously, a ruin swallowed by the wilderness. This was the Blackwood Refuge, a name I wouldn't know until later, but in that moment, it was simply salvation. I stumbled toward the warped wooden door, scraping away the ice. The air around the structure held a peculiar, heavy stillness, distinct from the howling wind outside. It promised the oblivion I craved. I slipped inside, the door groaning its complaint before slamming shut behind me. The cabin's interior was dim, thick with the scent of old wood, smoke, and something else, something primal, potent, and overwhelmingly male. It was the scent of pure, unadulterated alpha dominance, sharp, and laced with the metallic undercurrent of fresh blood. My heart seized in my chest. I wasn't alone. My eyes slowly adjusted to the gloom. The room was small, dominated by a rough-hewn fireplace where a few embers glowed faintly. Near the back wall, huddled on a makeshift cot, was a figure of intimidating size. He shifted, and my breath hitched. He was vast, a dark silhouette of heavily muscled and scarred flesh. His movement was slow, deliberate, indicating pain, yet radiating an immediate, dangerous readiness. His eyes snapped open, piercing gray. They were pools of banked fury and raw intelligence, locking onto me with the predatory efficiency of a wolf spotting prey. "Who are you?" The voice was a low growl, rough, commanding, and laced with an authority that instinctively demanded submission. It vibrated in the air, stirring the frightened Omega within me. I could only stammer, terrified. I needed shelter. I didn't know anyone was here. The Alpha pushed himself up, wincing subtly. Even injured, his towering presence filled the small space of the cabin, making the walls feel claustrophobic. My gaze fell to his hand, resting near his thigh. There, clutched loosely, was a bloodied hunting knife, its steel catching the meager light. He was Reese Kincaid, the Alpha King, though I didn't yet know his full devastating name. All I knew was the scent of overwhelming power, a rank so far above my own Omega status that the instinct to drop to my knees and bare my neck was almost unbearable. "Get out." His voice brooked no argument. "Please," I whispered, the cold and exhaustion finally winning. I swayed. "Ill leave in the morning. I was running from—" "I don't care what you were running from, little Omega," he interrupted, his eyes narrowing. "This is my refuge, and your scent." He inhaled deeply, his nostrils flaring, the pain in his expression momentarily replaced by a deep, stirring tension. "Your scent is a beacon." I had never encountered such raw dominance. My fear warred fiercely with a consuming, forbidden curiosity. Why was the King of Kings, the ruler so dominant he commanded respect across all territories, hiding wounded in a derelict structure like the Blackwood Refuge? He noticed the tremble in my frame, not just from fear, but from the deep cold that had seeped into my core. He didn't want me here, but the code of the wolf, even for a wounded king, disallowed simply letting a freezing Omega die on his doorstep. "Fine, stay in the corner," he bit out, his jaw tight. "Don't speak. Don't move. Don't touch anything." Thus began our fragile truce, a tense, silent cohabitation within the walls of the Blackwood Refuge. I learned his full name only when I heard him mumble it in a feverish sleep. Reese Kincaid, 35 years old, the Alpha King. The sheer weight of that realization crushed the air from my lungs. I had escaped a political marriage only to crash headlong into the most politically consequential figure in the territories. Days turned into nights, measured only by the changing patterns of the snow outside the single, grimy window. My initial terror slowly began to dilute, replaced by a strange, unnerving familiarity. I tended the fire, silently retrieved snow for water, and mostly, I watched him. He was harsh, demanding silence, offering only curt commands. He was magnificent, even in his injured state, the scars tracing a history of battles, his raw power barely contained by his rigid control. One evening, the silence was broken. I had been attempting to clean the crude bandages wrapped tightly around a massive gash on his flank. He flinched, a low growl rumbling in his chest. "You're clumsy," he muttered, his voice rough. "I'm trying to help. You'll get an infection," I retorted, surprising myself with the defiance in my tone. Back at the Citadel, Omegas were taught only compliance, but the isolation of the Blackwood Refuge was stripping away the gilded layers of my upbringing. He grabbed my wrist, his grip iron, stopping my motion. His gaze was intense, gray eyes burning into mine. "You shouldn't care, Autumn Sinclair. You should be miles from here, fulfilling your duty." The mention of duty, the mating ceremony I ran from, felt distant, irrelevant. My duty was a cage, I stated simply, pulling my hand back, though the heat of his skin lingered. It was then, in that confined, smoky space, that the atmosphere shifted, the fragile truce shattered. My Omega scent, usually suppressed by fear, bloomed in the warmth, meeting the potent musk of his distress and dominance. He leaned forward, his massive form eclipsing the light. The scent recognition hit me first, a wave of belonging, safety, and fierce protective possessiveness that resonated deep within my soul. It was primal, overwhelming, a connection that bypassed rank, politics, and fear entirely. The air grew thick, electric. This was the climax I hadn't anticipated, the ultimate confrontation not against the guards of the Citadel, but against destiny itself. "What is this?" His voice was barely a whisper, strained by effort, his control visibly fraying. He wasn't asking me, he was asking the universe. "I don't know," I managed, shaking my head, yet leaning unconsciously toward the gravitational pull of him. He reached out, his rough hand cupping my cheek. The contact was shocking, instantaneous, setting every nerve ending alight. My fearful curiosity transmuted into raw, undeniable intensity. "You are an Omega of the Haze Line," Reese Kincaid stated, his eyes dark with conflict. "You are promised politically. I am the Alpha King, recovering from an assassination attempt. We cannot be this, but we were." The sheer force of the recognition of the primal bond eclipsed all reason. The connection was irreversible, a fate far stronger than the calculated moves of the packs. I didn't choose him. Our souls simply snapped together, locking in the truth that transcended my birth rank. I was his, and he was mine. "The mating ceremony is irrelevant," I whispered, resting my head against his palm, finding a peace I had never known in my life of political expectation. "The Citadel is a ghost. I won't go back." Reese studied me, his gray eyes softening slightly, yet remaining intensely focused. He knew the chaos my presence caused. If the Pax discovered the runaway Omega destined for political marriage was hiding with the wounded Alpha King, her true mate, it would ignite a war. But the realization had settled. I was his, and no political maneuvering, no alliance, no amount of fleeing could change the biological imperative of the mate bond. He closed the distance between us, the pain in his flank momentarily forgotten as instinct took over. The kiss was harsh, possessive, a claim staked in the heart of the Blackwood Refuge. "You ran to find freedom," he rumbled against my lips, pulling me close against his powerful chest. But you found your future chained to me. I wrapped my arms around his waist, inhaling the sense of earth, smoke, and alpha power. I hadn't run to find love, or a king, or destiny. I had run for survival. Yet here, under the unyielding gaze of Reese Kincaid, the king who was also my mate, I found everything. My place was no longer defined by the obligation of the Haze Pack, but by the fire burning between us, a fire that could consume the world. I had found my future, deep in the wilderness, bound irrevocably to the Alpha King. I would not leave. The kiss wasn't a gentle request. It was a territorial claim, harsh and definitive, sealing the fate I had stumbled into. It tasted of metallic iron from the deep wound on his flank, mingled with the earthy scent of the wilderness and the overwhelming power of Reese. When he finally pulled back, he didn't release me. His powerful arms, scarred and corded with muscle, held me tight against the heat of his massive body, melting the residual chill from my long run through the frostbite taiga. The air in the Blackwood Refuge felt suffocatingly dense, no longer due to smoke or fear, but from the sheer volume of pheromones now intertwining. My Omega submission blooming brightly under the possessive dominance of the king. This wasn't the political alliance symbolized by the discarded heirloom mating band I was supposed to wear. This was instinct, raw, and unstoppable. Reese rested his forehead against mine, his breath ragged, betraying a vulnerability that belied his terrifying exterior. "You are the storm I ran from, little light," he murmured, his voice now low, stripped of its harsh command, resonating only with the deep tone of a discovered mate. "I didn't run to you," I whispered, my hands resting tentatively on the rough skin of his bare shoulder. "I ran from the political duty." "It makes no difference now," he stated, pulling back just enough to study my face, his gray eyes intense pools of complicated emotion. "The moment your scent hit this air, the silence was shattered. My isolation ended, and the consequences, Autumn, they are catastrophic." He was right. The political consequence of my disappearance was immense. The consequence of being found mated to the Alpha King, who was currently hiding and wounded, was unfathomable. It spelled war, revolution, and certain death for anyone who dared to challenge the bond. The next few days were a blur of intense proximity. The fragile truce evolved into an intense symbiosis. My fear was utterly vanquished, replaced by a fierce, driving urge to protect and nurture him. The rudimentary medical care I offered changed radically. Cleaning the gash on his flank, a deep, jagged wound from what he later confirmed was a specialized blade, confirming the assassination attempt, was no longer a frightened task, but an intimate ritual. I would trace the contours of his heavy scars, symbols of a life lived on battlefields and thrones, feeling the weight of his burdens. He, in turn, allowed a level of physical contact that would have been unimaginable hours before. He watched me constantly, his gaze unwavering, a silent, potent acknowledgement of the bond humming between us. One afternoon, as the wind howled outside, spitting snow against the single window pane, I finished rewrapping his bandage. The bloodied hunting knife sat on the floor beside the cot, a constant reminder of his primal readiness. But now, it felt less like a threat to me and more like a symbol of his desperate survival. "They will be searching the perimeter soon," Reese said, his voice flat, staring up at the low ceiling. "My disappearance has been too long. They know I was injured, but they don't know I survived the ambush. My enemies are patient. My pack is looking for me, too," I reminded him, stirring the meager stew over the embers. The remnants of the Haze Pack identification, the satchel of identity, were gone. But my face and rank were known across the territories. "If they find me here, they will realize what you are to me and what I am to you, and they will use it to destabilize the territories," he finished grimly. He sat up fully, his towering presence once again filling the cabin, though he still moved with controlled pain. "You were running from a political obligation, Autumn. Now, you are entangled in the deepest political conflict of the decade, protecting the most vulnerable king this territory has ever seen." The truth was sharp, but it didn't pierce the armor of my newfound determination. The gilded cage of the Ironwood Citadel seemed impossibly far away, a dream I had happily shattered. "I didn't ask for this bond," I admitted, turning to face him, the ladle clutched tight in my hand. "But now that it is here, I will not hide from it. The Haze Pack tried to use me as a pawn. Your enemies want to kill you. I am done being used." A flicker of raw admiration crossed his features, quickly masked by his usual guarded expression. "You misunderstand, Omega. I am telling you that you must leave, now, before the search parties close in." This was the true test, the moment where the primal bond met the crushing reality of his duty as a king. He was trying to push me away, not out of rejection, but out of protection. A heartbreaking choice between his safety and mine. "No," I stated firmly, walking over to him, placing my hand over his where it rested on his knee. The electrical current that surged between us was still potent, still shocking. "When I fled the Citadel, I chose freedom. Freedom meant choosing my own future. That future is not in the political prison I escaped, and it is certainly not running from my mate. Reese inhaled sharply, his gray eyes darkening with escalating desire and profound internal conflict. Autumn, I am the king. My fate is not safe. My enemies, they are powerful and vicious. And I am your mate, I countered, my small frame shaking slightly, not with fear, but with the force of my conviction. A mate protects. A mate serves. A mate stands. The mating ceremony I was running from is irrelevant, because this bond, this connection, overrides every decree, every political alliance. You can send me out into the frostbite taiga to die of exposure, but I will not leave you to face this alone. My declaration, fierce and unwavering, was the emotional climax of our time here. It was the point where I transitioned from runaway Omega to the fiercely loyal partner of the Alpha King. Reese reached up, cupping my jaw, his thumb gently stroking my cheek. The pain in his eyes was replaced by a deep, magnificent surrender. He stopped fighting the inevitable. He stopped fighting me. The risk is shared then, he conceded, the corner of his mouth curving slightly in the first genuine smile I had seen, a flash of powerful, dangerous warmth. If they find us here, they find us together. He pulled me onto the cot beside him, tucking me into the vast warmth of his body. The scent of him, protection, strength, and now, acceptance, enveloped me completely. The Blackwood Refuge, once a dilapidated ruin promising only temporary sanctuary, now felt like the only solid thing in a world collapsing into political chaos. We spent the rest of the evening planning, speaking in low, serious tones about the territories, the loyal pacts, and the political maneuvers required to secure his return to power, a power he had to reclaim soon, or the absence of the king would cause irrevocable damage. I learned that the attempted assassination was orchestrated by a coalition of minor pacts hoping to install a puppet ruler, the same pacts who were benefiting from my politically mandated mating ceremony. The threads of my escape and his injury were inextricably linked. I hadn't just run from my duty, I had inadvertently thrown a wrench into their plans, finding the one man who could dismantle their entire scheme. The heirloom mating band was forgotten, gathering dust on a velvet cushion somewhere in the citadel. My satchel of identity was lost to the snow. My future was no longer defined by symbols of political duty, but by the weight of the king's arm around me. As darkness fell completely over the frostbite taiga, Reese breathing deepened, and I felt the powerful, steady rhythm of his heart against my ear. His scent became my anchor. I closed my eyes, realizing the profound truth of my journey. I had run to find freedom, the freedom from expectation, from being a pawn. I found that freedom not in solitude, but in the ultimate tether of the mate bond. I was bound now, fiercely and irrevocably, to the most dominant male in the territories, the Alpha King. My future was chained to him, and for the first time in my life, I felt truly, magnificently free. The world outside could howl and plot. The haze pack could search the wilderness until the spring thaw. We would face them together. I buried my face in his neck, inhaling the intoxicating scent of my alpha. I would not leave the Blackwood Refuge until we were ready to emerge, not as a runaway Omega and a wounded king, but as two halves of a whole, ready to claim the future that destiny and the cold solitude of the cabin had forged for us. Our battle was only just beginning, but tonight, in the heart of the wilderness, under the heavy shadow of the Blackwood trees, we were safe, bound by fire and fate. I was home. The meager stew had long been eaten, the embers reduced to a faint, pulsing red glow that cast dancing shadows across the rough-hewn walls of the Blackwood Refuge. Reese had pulled a rough map, a meticulously detailed scroll showing the territory lines and allegiance flows, from a hidden compartment beneath the floorboards. It was fascinating to see the vast, unforgiving expanse of the frostbite taiga reduced to lines and labels, and even more fascinating to watch Reese manipulate the politics of entire kingdoms with a single, sharp fingertip. The Haze Pack territory is reliant on the trade routes through the southern passes, I noted, leaning over the map, my hair brushing his strong shoulder. If those routes are choked, the coalition who backed my mandated marriage loses their primary funding stream. Commander Volkov has always been loyal to the crown, but the southern passes are his vulnerability. Reese paused, his gray eyes lifting to meet mine, a mixture of surprise and approval in their depth. Your father used you as a political tool, Autumn, but he did not neglect your education. You understand the architecture of power better than many alphas I govern. I had to, I said simply, tracing the route of an old mountain path. In the Ironwood Citadel, understanding power was the only way to survive. I may have been a pawn, but I observed the hands that moved me. He gripped my hand, pulling it gently away from the map and pressing a kiss to my palm. a moment of unexpected tenderness that still made my breath hitch. We send word to Volkov, a subtle shift in the southern pass tariffs. The coalition will assume a territorial dispute, not the return of the king. It buys us time. Time for me to heal, and time for us to establish a secure route out of this prison. This isn't a prison, I countered softly, gazing around the dim, dilapidated cabin. It is where I found freedom, and where I found you. His expression softened, the hard lines of the king momentarily dissolving into the relief of the mate. He knew the risk of staying. Every tick of the clock increased the probability that the search parties, both my packs and his enemies, would converge. Our forced proximity deepened from a necessary cohabitation into an intricate, silent dance. Reese was still dominant, still commanding, but his orders were now laced with concern, his harsh demands balanced by a powerful protectiveness that resonated through the mate bond. I found my Omega instincts soaring, cleaning the cabin, foraging for the meager supplies we had, ensuring his wound remained clean and bound. It was a fierce satisfaction to know I was contributing, not to a political agenda, but to the survival of the man who claimed my soul. Reese was instantly alert, moving with a controlled speed that defied the deep gash still healing on his side. He grabbed the bloodied hunting knife from the floor. His presence shifted, becoming massive, terrifying, an elemental force contained within the tiny cabin walls. "They are closer than I anticipated," he growled, moving to the single, dusty window, peering out through a slit in the curtain. "That's a specialized tracker rifle. Only the coalition uses those in this sector." My blood ran cold, but the paralyzing fear I felt upon first entering the Blackwood Refuge was absent. Instead, a protective fury flared. I moved to the small hearth, shoving the embers deep into the ash, smothering the final traces of smoke. "How close?" I whispered, keeping my voice low, matching his intensity. "Less than a mile. They are moving fast. They have scent trackers, too. They're running a grid search. They will find the fire pit remnants, even if we smother the smoke." This was the climax, the moment of reckoning. The fragile sanctuary was shattered. Reese turned, his piercing gray eyes holding mine, the sheer primal power in his gaze overwhelming. "This is where it ends, Autumn. If we are found, the plan is compromised. You must go deeper into the taiga, away from my scent line. They seek me, not you. If you return to the Ironwood Citadel now, you might still be able to—" "Stop," I commanded, the words slicing through his alpha dominance, surprising both of us. My voice was steady, infused with the conviction of the mate bond. "Do you believe I ran from a gilded cage and found my mate, only to abandon him at the first sight of trouble? I told you, Reese. I will not leave." I stepped forward, gripping the heavy fur-lined cloak I had fashioned from a blanket earlier that week. I threw it over his shoulders, my hands insistent. "The coalition must not find the king injured. If they find us, they must find us prepared." We move out the back entrance, into the densest section of the spruce forest. They are tracking the scent of a wounded alpha. "I will mask your scent with the heavy wintergreen and birch tar I found in that old tin." Reese watched me, calculating. He saw not the dutiful Omega destined for political marriage, but a resource, a partner, a survivor. He saw his mate. The tension between us was excruciating, vibrating with the danger outside and the fierce loyalty inside. "If we run, we cannot stop," Reese said, his voice low and ragged. "The risk is exposure, the cold. If we are caught running, we are vulnerable." "We will not be caught," I vowed. I grabbed the satchel of identity, not the worthless political satchel, but the one I had assembled with basic survival tools, including the strong-smelling herbs. I smeared the sticky, dark paste across the fur cloak and across his exposed skin, ignoring the sharp, painful inhale he took when I brushed near his injury. "I am moving your scent line away from the cabin," I explained quickly, my movements precise and efficient. "They will follow the strongest trail. We need to confuse the trackers for the few hours it takes to reach the northern bluffs. Volkov's hidden scout post is there." His response was a slow, deliberate nod. This was the true recognition. He wasn't just accepting my presence, he was accepting my strategic input, relying on my knowledge of the local fauna and my intimate understanding of the hunters who operated in this territory. Reese paused at the doorway, the sheer size of his body barely fitting through the frame. He looked back at the Blackwood Refuge, the cabin that had been his wounded retreat, and our accidental crucible. "When we leave this place, we do not look back," he stated, his voice a low command meant only for me. "The king returns to claim his throne, Autumn, and you, Omega, you return as the consort he chooses, not the pawn they mandate." The finality of his words sealed our shared destiny. I didn't hesitate. I stepped out into the biting cold of the frostbite taiga, the snow crunching under my worn leather boots. The air was heavy, charged with anticipation, and the distant, dangerous scent of the approaching enemy. We moved silently, Reese's massive frame utilizing the shadow cover expertly, and my smaller size allowing me to weave through the dense, low-hanging spruce boughs. We established a wide, confusing perimeter around the cabin, using stream crossings and rocky outcrops to break the scent trail, just as I had learned from the survival manuals I secretly devoured in the Ironwood Citadel. Reese moved with surprising endurance despite the pain, fueled by the primal instinct to protect his mate and reclaim his power. After what felt like an eternity, we reached the cover of the ancient blackwood trees, a natural fortress carved into the side of the mountain ridge. We heard the distant, agitated barking of the scent hounds. They were at the cabin. The search was centralized there. We had bought ourselves the time we needed. Reese pressed me against the cold, rough bark of a towering tree, sheltering me from the whipping wind and the watchful eyes below. His body warmth was a magnificent anchor. "You saved us," he murmured into my hair, his relief palpable, warring with the lingering threat. "You chose to stand, and you won." I looked out over the vast, snow-covered landscape, no longer seeing a terrifying wilderness, but the territory that would soon be ruled by the Alpha King and his mate. "I didn't run from duty, Reese," I corrected, my voice barely audible over the wind. "I ran from the wrong duty. My true obligation began the moment I stepped into your refuge." He pulled back, his scarred hands framing my face, his gray eyes shining with fierce possession. "We will send the signal from the northern bluffs. Volkov will be ready, and the coalition will realize the true depth of their mistake." We continued the ascent toward the bluffs. The political turmoil awaited us, a dangerous, vicious world of betrayal and war. But I was no longer the fragile Omega fleeing the heirloom mating band. I was the woman walking beside the Alpha King, his strength bolstering my resolve, my presence healing his wounds. The cabin, the Blackwood Refuge, was now far below us, swallowed again by the shadows of the taiga, its purpose fulfilled. It was the sanctuary where fate had intervened, exchanging my political burden for a magnificent, terrifying destiny. My future was chained to Reese, and as we moved onward, shoulder to shoulder, toward the dawn breaking cold and hard over the horizon, I knew, with unshakable certainty, that I would never look back. The night is calling, and the wolves are waiting. Join the pack. Subscribe now to Malu's Werewolf Tales, and feed your hunger for the forbidden.